She wanted out of the marriage, but the Mafia boss refused to sign the papers. The papers were still warm from the printer when I set them on his desk. 6 pages, 2 signatures needed. Mine was already there, black ink pressed so hard into the paper I'd nearly torn it. I remember thinking that was fitting. 2 years of marriage, and I still didn't know how to be gentle with anything that belonged to Raffaele Vesparelli. Not even a pen. He didn't look up right away. That was his particular cruelty, making you wait, making you watch him finish a sentence in some ledger, some list of names that meant nothing to me and everything to the men who ended up dead because of them. The study smelled like cedar and gun oil, like it always did. Outside the window, the Tyrrhenian Sea threw itself against the cliffs below our house, over and over, patient the way only water can be. Sarah. He said my name the way he said everything, low, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world and I had none. Sign it, Raf. He finally looked up. Dark eyes, the kind of dark that doesn't reflect light so much as swallow it. 2 years married to this man, and I still felt my pulse stutter when he looked at me like that. Not fear, exactly. Something worse. Something that had never fully died no matter how hard I'd tried to kill it. He picked up the papers. For one absurd second, I let myself hope. Then he set them down again, unsigned, and slid them back across the desk toward me like a man returning a gift he found in poor taste. No. 1 word. That was all I got after weeks of lawyers, after nights spent drafting language soft enough not to provoke him and firm enough to actually mean something. No. You don't get to say no, I said. This isn't a negotiation. I'm not asking your permission to leave my own marriage. You misunderstand. He rose from the chair, and even that small motion filled the room the way it always did, like the walls existed only to contain him, barely. I am not negotiating. I am informing you. You will not be signing your way out of this family. Family? I almost laughed. You mean the empire. You mean the Vesparelli name and the accounts and the fact that half of Sicily still thinks I'm just decoration on your arm. I mean, he said, closing the distance between us until I could smell the salt and cedar on his skin, that I did not marry decoration. My back hit the bookshelf before I registered I'd been backing away. He didn't touch me. He never needed to. He simply existed too close, the way a storm exists too close to a ship that thought it had outrun the coastline. 2 years, Raf. 2 years of watching men bleed out in our dining room while you poured wine like it was nothing. 2 years of learning which of your associates I'm allowed to make eye contact with. I want a life, a quiet one. You know exactly what that costs me to admit out loud in this house. Something flickered behind his eyes, gone before I could name it. Almost like the mention of quiet touched a nerve he kept buried under 15 layers of control. You think I don't know what you sacrificed, he said. I know precisely what you sacrificed, every day of it. Then let me go. No. There it was again, that word, small and absolute, like the closing of a door I hadn't realized was still open a crack. Give me one reason, I said, that isn't about your pride. He reached past me, so close his forearm brushed my collarbone, and picked up a framed photo from the shelf behind me. Our wedding day. White roses that looked, in the harsh Sicilian sun, disturbingly like they'd been dipped in something darker than dew. Because, he said, setting the photo face down between us, there are things about your father's debt to this family that you were never told. Things that make your freedom considerably more complicated than a signature. My stomach dropped. What things? Sign nothing, he said, ignoring the question entirely, voice dipping into something almost gentle, which was somehow more frightening than his anger. Pack a bag instead. We're going to the coast house for a few days. You and I are going to have a conversation you should have had 2 years ago. I'm not going anywhere with you. His mouth curved, not quite a smile. You misunderstand again, mia moglie. That wasn't a request. I stood there in a study that smelled like the man who owned half my life, holding divorce papers that suddenly felt less like an exit and more like a match struck too close to something soaked in gasoline. Whatever he was about to tell me on that beach, I understood one thing with terrible clarity. I hadn't been fighting to leave a marriage. I'd been fighting to leave a war I didn't know I was already in. If you're already hooked, my darlings, a quiet subscribe keeps stories like this one coming, because trust me, this is only the first page of the papers he refused to sign. Engagement question 1. If someone you loved refused to let you go, but claimed it was to protect you from a truth worse than the marriage itself, would you stay long enough to hear it? Tell me in the comments.
I hadn't always hated the quiet of that coast house. Once, a long time ago, before I understood what silence in this family actually meant, I'd thought it was romantic. The whitewashed walls, the bougainvillea choking the balcony rails, the sound of the sea close enough to touch. Now I understood silence was just Raf's favorite weapon. He used it the way other men use their fists. We didn't speak on the drive. 2 of his men trailed us in a second car, close enough to matter, far enough to pretend we had privacy. I watched Sicily blur past the window. Olive groves, sun-bleached stone, a country that had buried more secrets than it had ever told, and thought about the word he'd used in the study. Debt. I knew my father's name had once meant something in Palermo. I knew, in the vague way a daughter knows things she was never meant to understand, that the Moretti family had fallen on hard times before Raf's syndicate absorbed what was left of it. I knew I had been part of the transaction. What I hadn't known, what apparently I still didn't know, was the shape of what my father actually owed. You said things about my father, I said finally, somewhere past the 3rd hour of silence. Say them now. Not yet. Raf. Not yet, Sarah. His hands stayed loose on the wheel, but his jaw had gone tight, the muscle work in the way it only did when someone mentioned his dead sister, or his father, or, apparently, mine. This is not a conversation for a moving car. I turned back to the window and let the anger sit in my chest like a coal, refusing to go cold. The house came into view at dusk, perched over the water the way it had been for 3 generations of Vesparelli men who liked their views the way they liked their enemies, visible from a great distance, unable to reach them. Marco was already there when we arrived, leaning against the porch rail with the particular stillness of a man who'd learned patience the hard way. Raf's underboss. The wolf, they called him, though I'd never once seen him show his teeth to me. Don, Marco said, straightening. His eyes flicked to me, then back to Raf, some silent language passing between them that I'd stopped trying to translate years ago. We need to talk. Now. Later. Raf. Marco's voice dropped, urgent in a way that made the coal in my chest flare into something closer to fear. The Barones made contact this morning. I watched something shift across my husband's face. Not fear, Raf didn't do fear, but its cousin. Calculation, sharpened into a blade. About? Marco's gaze flicked to me again. Maybe we should. She stays. Raph said, and I felt something unexpected at those two words. Not gratitude exactly. Something closer to being seen for the first time in weeks. They know about the divorce filing, Marco said. Salvatore Barone reached out to her lawyer's office directly, offered protection, a new identity, resources, safe passage out of Sicily entirely, in exchange for information. The blood left my face so fast I felt the porch tilt beneath me. I never spoke to the Barones. I don't even know Salvatore Barone. I believe you, Marco said, and he sounded like he meant it, which somehow made it worse. But they believe you're a woman who wants out badly enough to make a deal with anyone who offers it. And once they believe that, Sarah, it doesn't matter what's true. It only matters what they can use. Raph hadn't moved. He was staring out at the darkening water with the stillness of a man doing arithmetic on how many ways this could end in bodies. She's not going near the Baroness, he said finally. She might not have a choice, Marco said quietly. Not if she keeps pushing for that signature. The moment those papers are finalized, Sarah stops being protected by the Vesparelli name. She becomes exactly what Salvatore wants, a woman with access to this family's secrets and no reason left to protect them. I stood on that porch between the two of them, listening to my own life get redrawn by men who'd apparently been mapping its borders long before I'd noticed the lines. You're telling me, I said slowly, that the divorce isn't just a marriage ending. It's a death sentence. Neither of them answered. That silence told me everything their words wouldn't. Raph turned to me then, and for the first time since the study, since the papers, since 2 years of careful distance, I saw something raw move behind his eyes. Something that looked almost like fear, if Raphael Vesparelli had ever allowed himself such a human thing. This is why I didn't sign, he said. Not pride, Sarah. This. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him I didn't believe a word of it, that this was exactly the kind of story a man like him would invent to keep a woman on a leash. But Marco's face held no performance in it, only exhaustion, and somewhere out past the black water, I understood with sudden, sick clarity that I had been standing at the edge of a war for 2 years without ever being told the terms. Then tell me everything, I said. Tonight. All of it. Raph held my gaze a long moment, the sea wind pulling at the collar of his shirt, and for once he didn't argue. Tonight, he agreed. Everything. He told me on the terrace, after Marco left, and the staff had gone dark in their quarters, and it was just the two of us, a bottle of wine neither of us touched, and the sound of waves working at the rocks below like something patient and hungry. Your father, Raph began, did not simply owe my family money. I know that part, I said. The debt, the marriage. You don't have to relitigate my own life for me. You know the part he let you know? His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it, stripped of the performance he wore like armor in front of everyone else. 22 years ago, before either of us were old enough to understand what our fathers actually did for a living, there was a shipment. Weapons, moving through Moretti territory into ours. It went missing. Not stolen, sold. Sold to the Barones by your father for a price that kept the Moretti name solvent for another decade. The wine in my glass suddenly looked like something I couldn't touch. That's not possible. My father hated the Baroness. He used to perform hatred beautifully, Raph said, because performing loyalty to my father would have gotten him killed for the betrayal underneath it. Sarah, your father spent 2 decades playing both families against each other. The marriage, our marriage, was his last move. A way to bind the Moretti name to mine so completely that the old debt would die quietly, buried under a wedding no one would ever think to question. I stood, because sitting suddenly felt like drowning. You're telling me I was a peace treaty for a betrayal I didn't even know existed? I'm telling you, he said, rising too, close enough now that I had to tilt my head back to hold his gaze, that Salvatore Barone has known the truth for 22 years and has been waiting for the right moment to use it. And the moment you file for divorce, the moment you stop being protected by my name, you become the only living thread connecting your father's betrayal to a debt the Barones can finally collect on. From you. However they choose. The night air had gone cold, or maybe that was just me. Why didn't you tell me this 2 years ago? Because 2 years ago, he said, and something in his voice cracked open in a way I'd never once heard. I still believed I could protect you from ever needing to know. I believed I could simply make you safe enough that the truth would never matter. And now you're trying to leave a house I can no longer guarantee is safer than the world outside it. So I need you to hear this clearly, Serafina. He said my full name the way he only did in moments that mattered, and despite everything, my chest still tightened at the sound of it. I am not refusing to sign because I want to own you. I am refusing because the moment I do, Salvatore Barone will have exactly what he's been waiting 22 years to collect. So what? I'm trapped either way. In a marriage I don't want, or in a war I didn't start. There is a third option. His eyes held mine, dark and unflinching. Let me finish what your father started and I failed to finish 2 years ago. Let me end the debt myself, permanently, so that when the papers are finally signed, you walk away from this family owing nothing to anyone and owning your life outright. And if I say no, if I just want out, tonight, consequences and all? Something moved behind his eyes. Pain, maybe, or the memory of it. Then I will sign the papers tomorrow morning, and I will spend whatever time I have left keeping you alive from a distance you'll never see. That is also an option, Sarah. I am not the monster who forces you to stay for my own comfort. I am the monster trying to keep you breathing long enough to leave properly. I hadn't expected that. 2 years of believing his refusal was about control, about pride, about the particular arrogance of a man who didn't lose things gracefully. And here he was, offering me an exit that cost him everything and asking nothing for himself in return, except time. Why does it matter to you? I asked quietly. Whether I leave properly or not. You could let the Baronets take the fall for whatever happens to me. It would solve your problem too. He looked at me like I'd said something that physically hurt him. Is that truly what you believe of me? After 2 years? I didn't have an answer. Or worse, I did, and it terrified me more than any of the Barone's threats. Give me until the end of this month, he said. Let me handle Salvatore. After that, if you still want the papers signed, I will sign them myself, in front of witnesses, and I will not say another word against it. The offer sat between us on that terrace, like something alive. I knew, even as I opened my mouth to answer, that agreeing meant stepping fully back into his world. The surveillance, the danger, the particular gravity of orbiting a man who filled every room he entered, whether he meant to or not. I knew it meant more nights like this one, more truths I might not survive learning. 1 month, I said finally. And Raph, if I find out you're lying to me about any part of this, I walk. Consequences be damned. Something that might have been relief moved across his face, quickly buried. 1 month, he agreed. Now come inside. It's cold, and there are things about tomorrow you'll need to be prepared for. I followed him into the house that had once felt like a cage, and for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't entirely sure anymore which one of us was actually trapped. Matteo called before sunrise, which meant something was wrong. My brother never called before sunrise unless the world had tilted. "It's Mama," he said, voice tight in a way that made my whole body go cold. "She collapsed at the house last night. They're saying it's her heart. Sarah, you need to come now." I don't remember deciding to move. I remember Raf's hands steady on my shoulders as I shook, remember him taking the phone from me and speaking to my brother in a voice so calm it seemed to physically hold the room together. Remember a car appearing in the driveway before I'd even finished pulling on shoes. The hospital in Palermo smelled like antiseptic and fear. Matteo met us in the hallway outside the cardiac unit, and the look on his face told me everything the doctors hadn't yet. "They need a procedure," he said. "Tonight. It's not covered. The good surgeon, the one with the actual survival numbers, he's private. We don't have..." His voice broke. "We don't have that kind of money, Sarah. Not since Papa." I felt Raf go very still beside me. "Which surgeon?" he said. Matteo blinked at him, thrown by the question. "Dr. Antonelli. But he's booked for months. He's not even..." Raf was already on his phone, walking a few steps away, voice low and clipped in a way I recognized from 100 late-night calls I'd learned not to ask about. I watched my husband, the man who 2 years ago I'd hated for the wealth that had bought my father's silence, move through that hospital corridor like a force of weather, and within 20 minutes, a private surgical suite had a new name on the schedule, and my mother had a chance she hadn't had an hour before. "How?" I whispered when he came back to stand beside me. "It doesn't matter how," he said. "It matters that she'll be alive tomorrow." I stood in that sterile hallway and felt something crack open in my chest that I'd spent 2 years bricking shut. This was the danger of him, not the guns, not the ledgers, not the particular violence that lived under his calm. The danger was this: the way he could turn a phone call into a miracle for the people I loved most, and never once make me feel like I owed him for it, even though I did. God help me, I did. The surgery took 6 hours. Matteo and I sat in a waiting room that smelled like burnt coffee, while Raf stood by the window, making calls I didn't ask about, occasionally catching my eye like he was checking whether I was still breathing. "You didn't have to do this," I told him, somewhere around hour 4. "Yes," he said simply. "I did." "Why?" He was quiet long enough that I thought he wouldn't answer. "Because I watched my own mother die in a hospital that couldn't save her, waiting for a surgeon my father refused to pay for out of some principle about not owing favors to rivals. I was 12. I promised myself, standing in that hallway, that if I ever had the power to change an outcome like that for someone, I would use it. Every time. No exceptions. I hadn't known that about him. 2 years married, and I was still discovering the architecture of the man underneath the dawn, the boy who'd built an empire, in part, out of a promise made in a hospital hallway. My mother woke at midnight, weak but breathing, her hand finding mine before her eyes even fully opened. "Sarah," she whispered, "your husband, tell him..." She stopped, tears cutting through the exhaustion on her face. "Tell him thank you." I found Raf in the corridor afterward, and before I could talk myself out of it, I put my arms around him. He went rigid with surprise for half a second before his arms came around me, careful, like I was something he was afraid to hold too hard. "Thank you," I said into his shirt. "You don't owe me gratitude," he said quietly. "You owe me nothing. That's the point, Sarah. That was never a transaction." But it was, in a way. just not the kind he meant. Because standing there in that hallway, I felt the last of my careful anger toward him crack down the middle, and I understood, with a kind of dread that tasted almost like hope, that this month I'd agreed to wasn't going to end the way I'd planned it. 2 days later, he told me there was a meeting I needed to attend, a negotiation with one of the northern families, a matter of territory and respect that required, for reasons he didn't fully explain, a wife who could sit at that table and prove the Vesparelli marriage was stronger than the rumors suggested. I understood, without him saying it outright, that this was about the Barones too, about making sure every family in Sicily believed our marriage was unbreakable before Salvatore could convince them otherwise. "I need you beside me," Raf said. "Not behind me. Beside me." For the first time in 2 years, that request didn't feel like a cage. It felt like being handed a seat at a table I hadn't known I wanted. The negotiation was held in a private dining room overlooking the Palermo harbor. 12 men in dark suits and one woman who'd spent 2 years being underestimated by every single one of them. I wore emerald silk that Raf had chosen himself, and when I caught his eye across the table during the Northern Dawn's opening remarks, I understood he'd dressed me not as decoration, but as a weapon. Sharp, deliberate, impossible to look away from. I spoke twice during that dinner. Once to correct a shipping figure the Northern Dawn's accountant had gotten wrong, and once to point out, with a calm I didn't entirely feel, that a clause in their proposed territory agreement quietly favored their family by nearly 11%. The table went silent. Raf didn't look at me right away. He looked at the Northern Dawn, watching the older man recalculate, in real time, exactly how much he'd underestimated the woman across the table. "My wife," Raf said finally, "has a mind for numbers that has cost more men more money than they'd like to admit." It wasn't quite pride in his voice. It was something rawer than that, a kind of hunger, banked and controlled, the way a man looks at something he spent a long time convincing himself not to want too openly. The negotiation ended in our favor. By the time we left the harbor restaurant, the last of the wine warm in my blood, I was aware of him beside me in a way I hadn't let myself be aware of in longer than I wanted to admit. We didn't speak in the car, but when we reached the coast house, when the driver pulled away and left us alone on the gravel under a sky gone thick with stars, Raf stopped walking toward the door and simply looked at me. "You terrified Alessandro Conte tonight," he said. "Good." "You terrify me," he said, quieter. "And I have made a career of not being terrified of anything." The air between us had changed, thickened into something with weight, something I could feel pressing against my ribs. I should have walked past him into the house. I should have remembered the papers still sitting unsigned in his study, the month I'd agreed to, the careful walls I'd built to survive 2 years of wanting a man I'd told myself I only tolerated. Instead, I stepped closer. "Say that again," I said. "You terrify me." His voice had dropped to something low and unguarded, a register I'd never once heard from him in 2 years of marriage. Because I spent 2 years telling myself I married a woman I would learn to manage, and instead I married a woman I cannot stop thinking about, cannot stop watching, cannot seem to survive being near without wanting something I promised myself I wouldn't ask for. "What are you asking for now?" His hand came up, slow enough that I could have stepped back. I didn't. His fingers traced along my jaw, and the touch went through me like something lit. "Permission," he said. "For once in my life, Sarah, I am asking." I answered him by closing the last of the distance myself. The kiss was nothing like the careful, dutiful contact we'd shared in the early months of our marriage, back when we were both still performing a role neither of us believed in. This was 2 years of banked tension, finally given permission to burn. His hands framed my face like I was something he'd been forbidden and had decided, finally, he no longer cared about the cost of wanting. I fisted my hands in his shirt and felt his breath catch against my mouth. Felt the careful control he wore like a second skin finally crack. We didn't make it past the terrace doors with any grace. He backed me against the frame, mouth trailing to the curve of my throat, and I felt the low sound that pulled from him when I arched into it, something that sounded dangerously close to my name breaking in half. "Tell me to stop," he murmured against my skin, "and I will." "Don't," I breathed. "Don't you dare stop." What happened after that belonged only to the dark and the sound of the sea below the terrace, his hands unhurried despite the hunger driving them, my name in his mouth like something sacred, 2 years of distance dissolving into a night neither of us would be able to pretend away by morning. When I finally slept, tangled in sheets that smelled like him, it was with a terrifying, undeniable clarity. Whatever this month was supposed to resolve, it had just become infinitely more complicated. I woke at dawn to find him already awake, watching me with an expression I'd never seen on him before, something unguarded, almost afraid. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "Something I should have told you before last night, not after." My stomach dropped. "Raph, there's more to your father's story," he said. "More than I told you on the terrace. And I think, after last night, you deserve to hear all of it before this goes any further." Engagement question 2. When someone finally drops their walls with you, after years of distance, does it make you trust them more? Or does it make you wonder what else they've been hiding? Let me know below. "Your father didn't just sell that shipment to the Barones," Raph said. We sat in the kitchen now, sunlight cutting through the windows in a way that felt almost cruel given what was coming. "He came to my father afterward, confessed, begged for a way to make it right before my father discovered the betrayal on his own." "That doesn't sound like the man who let me marry you as payment," I said, "because that wasn't the payment your father offered first." Raph's jaw tightened. "He offered his own life, told my father to kill him instead, quietly, and let the debt die with him rather than touch you or Matteo. My father refused." "Why?" "Because dead men don't work off debts," Raph said. "And because my father, despite everything he was, had a code about not touching men who confessed their own sins instead of hiding them. He gave your father a choice instead. Full restitution, paid over decades, or a marriage that would bind the family so completely the old betrayal would cease to matter. And my father chose the marriage, chose me." "Your father," Raph said carefully, "chose the option that let you live a life of wealth and safety instead of the crushing poverty restitution would have meant for your whole family. He believed, genuinely believed, that marrying you to me was a mercy, not a sentence." I sat with that for a long moment, feeling 2 years of resentment shift and resettle into something more complicated. He never told me any of this, because telling you would have meant admitting what he'd done. And your father, whatever his sins, loved you too much to let you see him as anything less than the man who'd protected you. "There's something else," I said, watching his face. "You wouldn't be telling me all this now, this carefully, unless there was a part you're still working up to." Raph's silence confirmed it before his words did. "Salvatore Barone isn't only circling because of old debts," he said finally. "He's circling because he believes, has believed for years, that your father's blood connects you to something else. A ledger, records of every transaction the Moretti family brokered between our two families for a decade before the marriage. Names, Dates, amounts, enough to end 3 different families if it became public, mine included. I don't have a ledger, Raph. I've never even heard of it. I know, he said, but your father may have hidden it somewhere before he died, and Salvatore believes you know where. That's the real reason he offered you protection in exchange for information. He's not interested in your freedom, Sarah. He's interested in what he believes you're sitting on. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the sunlight too bright. So, even if I sign the papers, even if I walk away today, I'm not safe. Not from this. No, Raph admitted. You're not. Not until we find that ledger, or convince Salvatore beyond doubt that it doesn't exist, or that you have no access to it even if it does. Do you think it exists? His pause told me more than any answer could have. I think your father was a careful man who spent a decade playing 2 dangerous families against each other and surviving it. Careful men keep insurance. Yes, Sarah, I think it exists somewhere. Then help me find it, I said, not to protect your empire, to end this, permanently. I'm done being a chess piece in a war 3 men started before I was even born. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or the particular tenderness of a man watching someone he'd underestimated step fully into her own power. There's a property, he said slowly. Your father's old countryside house outside Corleone. It's been sitting empty since he died. Your mother couldn't bear to sell it, but she never goes back either. If he hid something, it's the most likely place. Then we go today. Sarah, today, Raph, I've spent 2 years being protected from my own life. I'm done being protected. I want to find this thing myself. He studied me for a long moment, and I watched him make a decision I suspected cost him something. The decision to let me walk toward danger instead of standing between me and all of it, the way every instinct in him clearly screamed to do. Together then, he said, not you alone, never you alone, but together. I nodded, and for the first time since this nightmare began in his study with 6 pages and 1 signature missing, I felt something that wasn't fear or fury or grief. I felt purpose. The countryside house outside Corleone had the particular sadness of a place that used to hold a family and now only held dust. My father's study sat exactly as he'd left it. Books still stacked at careless angles, a coffee cup gone gray with age still sitting on the desk like he might walk back in any moment and finish it. We searched for 3 hours before Marco called with the news that changed everything. Salvatore knows you're at the Corleone property, he said, voice tight through the phone speaker. Someone in your circle is talking to him, Raph. This wasn't guesswork. Someone told him exactly where to look. I watched Raph's face go through something complicated. Anger, calculation, and underneath it, something that looked almost like grief. Who? He said. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. I don't know yet, but whoever it is has access to conversations only a handful of people could have heard. I'm working on it. Raph ended the call and stood very still for a moment, and I understood, watching him, that betrayal from within his own ranks cut deeper than any threat from outside it ever could. We need to move faster, he said. If Salvatore knows we're here, he'll send men before nightfall. We found it 40 minutes later, a false panel beneath the floorboards of my father's study, exactly the kind of hiding place a careful, frightened man would choose. Inside, a leather-bound ledger, water-damaged at the edges but legible, and beneath it, an envelope with my name written in my father's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Sarah. Mia Cara. If you're reading this, I am gone, and the truth has finally caught up to the life I built, trying to protect you from it. Everything I did, the debt, the marriage, the silence, I did to keep you and your brother safe from a world I should never have let touch our family. I know it cost you a freedom I had no right to take. I hope, wherever you are when you read this, you've found a version of safety I could never give you honestly. The ledger is the only leverage strong enough to end this permanently. Use it carefully. Trust Raphael. Whatever else he is, he never once broke a promise he made to me about protecting you, even when keeping that promise cost him. I'm sorry, cara mia. I was never brave enough to tell you the truth while I was alive. I'm hoping this letter is braver than I ever managed to be. Your father. I didn't realize I was crying until Raph's hand found my back, steady and warm. He knew, I whispered. He knew what this would cost me, and he was trying to protect you the only way he knew how, Raph said quietly. Same as I've been trying to do for 2 years. Badly, maybe, but trying. I looked up at him, ledger clutched to my chest, and felt the last piece of the wall I'd kept between us finally give way. You've known me for 2 years, and you've been fighting a war I didn't even know existed, every single day, without once making me carry the weight of it until you had no choice. I would carry it forever, if I could, he said. I would carry all of it, Sarah, if it meant you never had to feel afraid in your own life again. The sound of tires on gravel outside cut through the moment like a blade. Raph's whole body changed, soldier replacing husband in the space of a heartbeat. Baron's men, stay behind me. Now. I'd never seen him move the way he moved through that house, clearing rooms with a precision that told me exactly how many times he'd done this before. Gun drawn, body positioned between me and every window, every door. Through the study curtains, I counted 4 men crossing the overgrown lawn, and my heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. Give us the ledger, a voice called from outside. And no one needs to get hurt today. You know that's not how this ends, Raph called back, voice utterly steady despite the danger closing in around us. Not for men who work for Salvatore Barone. Gunfire shattered the study window a heartbeat later, and I dropped to the floor with the ledger clutched against my chest. My father's letter crumpled in my fist, understanding with sudden, terrible clarity that whatever came next would decide not just whether I got my freedom. It would decide whether either of us survived long enough for freedom to matter at all. The next 90 seconds happened in fragments I'd spend years trying to fully piece back together. Raph returned fire through the shattered window, his body a wall between me and every angle the gunman could take. I heard Marco's voice crackling through his earpiece, heard the word backup, heard glass and splintered wood, and my own heartbeat drowning out everything except the certainty that I could not lose him. Not now. Not after everything it had taken to finally see him clearly. Sarah. His voice cut through the chaos, low and controlled, even as bullets tore through the room around us. The safe room. Beneath the kitchen floor. Go, now. Not without you. I need you alive more than I need you brave right now, he snapped, and for the first time in 2 years I heard real fear in his voice, not for himself. Go. I went, ledger and letter pressed against my chest, crawling through the ruined study toward the kitchen while gunfire cracked behind me. I found the trapdoor exactly where he'd described it, dropped into a space barely large enough to stand, and pressed my hands over my mouth to keep from screaming as the fight above me continued in bursts of noise that felt like they were tearing the whole house apart. Then silence. I don't know how long I crouched in that darkness before the trapdoor opened and Raph's face appeared above me, blood at his temple, but alive, breathing, alive. It's done, he said. Marco's men arrived in time. 2 of Salvatore's men are dead. The other 2 are talking. I climbed out and into his arms before he'd even finished the sentence, and he held me so tightly I felt the tremor running through his whole frame, the aftermath of a fear he'd been too disciplined to show me until the danger had actually passed. "You could have died," I said into his chest. "So could you," he said. "And I have never in my life been as afraid as I was in the seconds I didn't know if that bullet had found you instead of the wall." That night, back at the coast house with Raph's temple stitched and Marco posting men at every entrance, we sat together on the terrace where all of this had truly begun. The offer, the confession, the night that had changed everything between us. 2 of the men we caught gave up Salvatore's location, Raph said, and something else, the name of the person feeding him information from inside our house. My blood went cold. "Who?" "Donatella," he said quietly, and I watched something break behind his eyes as he said his own mother's name. My mother has been in contact with Salvatore for months, feeding him details about our marriage, about the divorce filing, about exactly where we'd be and when. Why would she? Because she never believed I should have married a Moretti, he said, voice raw in a way I'd rarely heard. Because she believes the debt should have been collected the old way, and she spent 2 years waiting for an opportunity to force an end to a marriage she never approved of. I don't think she meant for it to turn violent. I think she believed exposing the divorce filing to Salvatore would simply push things toward a quiet dissolution. I don't think she understood, or wanted to understand, what a man like Salvatore actually does with leverage like that. "What happens now?" "Now," Raph said, jaw tight with a grief I understood too well, "I do what my father should have done years ago instead of letting old wounds fester into war. I end it. Completely. Salvatore, the debt, all of it, tomorrow, with the ledger as leverage and the truth as a blade. And I make sure my mother never has the opportunity to gamble with your life again." I reached for his hand, lacing our fingers together on the table between us. "And after tomorrow, if it works, if this actually ends." He turned to look at me, and in the moonlight I saw a man stripped down to something honest for the first time since I'd met him. "After tomorrow," he said, "the choice is entirely yours, Sarah. Sign the papers and walk away, free and safe and owing nothing to anyone. Or stay, not because a debt or a danger demands it, but because you choose this. Choose me. I will accept either answer. I only needed you to have the freedom to actually choose." I didn't answer him that night. Some choices, I was learning, deserved to be made in daylight, with clear eyes, after the smoke had finally cleared. But I didn't let go of his hand either. Not once. The whole night through. The meeting with Salvatore Barone took place in neutral territory, a vineyard estate outside Trapani, chosen by 3 families who'd learned, over generations, that blood spilled on your own land was blood you'd spend years cleaning up. I sat beside Raph at that table, the ledger between us like a loaded gun no one had fired yet. Salvatore arrived with 4 men, and the particular arrogance of someone who believed he still held every card. That confidence lasted exactly as long as it took Raph to slide the ledger across the table. 22 years, Raph said, of every transaction your family brokered with mine through Alessio Moretti. Enough to end the Barone name in this region within a week, if it reached the wrong hands. My wife found it. My wife has chosen, generously, not to release it. Yet, Salvatore's eyes moved to me, calculating, reassessing everything he'd assumed about the woman he'd tried to buy with an offer of freedom. "And what does she want in exchange?" "An end," I said, before Raph could answer for me. "Not a truce. Not a temporary peace you'll violate the moment it's convenient. A full, permanent end to any claim your family believes it has on mine. The debt, the marriage, all of it. You never approach me, my family, or the Vesparelli name again. In exchange, this ledger disappears, and the truth about your family's role in a decade of illegal arms trafficking disappears with it. And if I refuse? Then it goes to every rival family in Sicily by morning, Raff said, voice like ice over stone, along with the 2 men currently in my custody who are more than willing to testify about your involvement in the attack on my wife yesterday. You will not survive the week, Salvatore. Not the fallout from your allies, not the fury of the families you've betrayed alongside mine. This is not a threat. It's arithmetic. The silence that followed stretched long enough that I heard my own pulse in my ears. Salvatore Barone was, whatever else he was, not a stupid man. He understood arithmetic. Agreed, he said finally, bitterness thick in his voice. The debt dies today. All of it. We left that vineyard as the sun dropped low over the hills, and I felt something in my chest unclench that had been wound tight since a study, 6 pages, and 1 missing signature 2 years. No, in truth, a lifetime ago. Donatella was waiting when we returned to the coast house, composed and cold as always, though something in her posture had shifted since Marco had confronted her with the truth of what she'd done. I did what I believed was necessary, she told her son, refusing to meet my eyes. I never intended for anyone to be hurt. Intentions, Raff said, are not currency in this family, Mother. You know that better than anyone. You will leave for the countryside estate by morning, and you will not return to this house or to my business until I decide otherwise. That is not a punishment. That is mercy, and you will not test how far it extends a second time. I watched a woman who had ruled over this family with an iron will finally quietly comply. That night, the coast house was ours alone for the first time since this had all begun. I found Raff on the terrace where every important truth of this story had been spoken, staring out at a sea gone calm and silver under a full moon. The papers are still in your study, I said, coming to stand beside him. Unsigned. I know. You said the choice was mine. It is. He turned to face me fully, and I saw in the moonlight a man who had spent 2 years learning to survive the fear of loving someone he might one day lose. Whatever you decide, Sarah, I will live with it. I promised you that, and I meant it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the papers I'd carried with me from the study that morning, folded small, edges soft from handling. I set them on the terrace railing between us. Then I tore them in half. I'm not staying because of debt, or danger, or duty, I said, watching something break open across his face. Relief and disbelief and a hope he'd clearly refused to let himself fully feel until this exact moment. I'm staying because somewhere between a war I didn't ask for and a man I told myself I only tolerated, I fell in love with you, Raffaele Vesparelli, completely, inconveniently, on purpose now. He crossed the space between us in a single step, hands framing my face like I was something infinitely precious he'd finally been given permission to hold. I have loved you, he said, voice breaking on the words in a way I never thought I'd hear from him. Since the moment you corrected my accountant's numbers at our own engagement dinner and made him weep in front of 12 armed men, I have simply been too much of a coward to say it, for fear you'd use it as one more reason to run. I'm done running. Good, he murmured against my mouth, because I intend to spend the rest of my life making absolutely certain you never have a reason to want to. We stood on that terrace as the torn papers fluttered off the railing and into the dark water below, the last remnant of an exit I no longer wanted. carried out to sea like something finally, fully released. 6 months later, I stood in that same study, no longer a stranger to the ledgers and the quiet architecture of a life I'd once resented and had come, slowly and completely, to choose. Raph found me there at dusk, wrapping his arms around me from behind, chin resting against my hair. "Regrets?" he asked, the way he always did now, not from doubt, but from the particular tenderness of a man who never wanted to assume anything about my happiness again. I turned in his arms and kissed him, slow and certain, in a house that had finally truly become mine. "Not one," I said, "not a single one." Outside, the Tyrrhenian Sea kept its endless rhythm against the cliffs, patient as ever, keeping the last of our secrets exactly where they belonged. Engagement. Question 3. Do you think love that starts as duty and danger can ever become something real? Or does it always stay tangled in what it costs to survive it? I want to hear your honest take below. Outrow. And that, my darlings, is where Serafina and Raphael's story finally rests. Not in a signature, but in a choice freely made, on a terrace overlooking a sea that watched every version of their war and their love unfold. If this one kept you up later than you meant to stay, you know exactly what to do. Hit subscribe, drop a comment telling me which act broke you a little, and I'll see you in the next descent into the dark. Until then, sweet dreams, my sinners. You know by now they never quite are.